Welcome to this press conference following the vote in the Legal Affairs Committee on the simplification of sustainability reporting and due diligence. I'm Martina Vaš. I'm covering work of the Legal Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. And I'm here today with the rapporteur of the file, Mr. Jörgen Warborn from EPP and from Sweden, who will be briefing us on the outcome of the Legal Affairs Committee vote today. Allow me some organizational remarks at the beginning. We'll be taking questions from the press conference room, but also from online. When given the floor, please state your name and the name of the media you're representing. And for those participating online, when you're given the word, please put your camera on and press your speak button. Interpretation is available in English, French, German, and Swedish. And now, without further ado, let me pass the floor to the rapporteur, Mr. Warborn.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you all for coming. I'm really happy about the outcome we had in Jury today. It shows that the European Parliament shows a great support for simplification. The final vote, as you might have seen, was 17 votes in favour, 6 votes against and 2 abstentions. So a big support for simplification. This also means that we deliver on the very ambitious timetable that we set up, since we had the stop the clock process and we have to finalize even the trialogues before the end of the year. I set out a goal of achieving to cut costs more than the Commission did, and now we gained support from different political groups for this ambitious target. Let me maybe put the omnibus package a bit in its context, first of all, because we know for sure that European growth has been falling behind a lot of other competitors, a lot of other countries around the world. In fact, Europe is falling behind almost every country around the world, and we cannot let this continue, because this means that we do not create the jobs in Europe, we do not create long-term prosperity, and this, of course, is also linked to our security policy. So therefore, we had to change the situation, and we do that with a lot of different measures, and I'm happy that the Commission presented this omnibus, because this is, of course, one of the most important parts, simplification. But we need to do other things as well in order to come back to growth in Europe. So back on content, what did we achieve in the negotiation and in these votes? I'd like to mention 4 specific items that were politically sensitive throughout the process and give you a bit on the content here. First of all, of course, the scope. Which companies should be within the scope of both CSRD and CSDDD? And as you might have seen, for CSRD, the scope is 1,000 employees and 450 million in turnover. And for CSDDD, it's 5,000 employees and 1.5 billion in turnover. In short, this means that we focus only on the big corporations and we shield the small and medium-sized enterprises. Second of all, we have the transition plans. Here, there are no changes in our proposal to the Commission's proposal on CSRD, but there are differences to CSDDD. And the main issue, I would say, is that the Parliament, we have no implementing actions in our climate transition plans. And there are minor differences that I hope we can sort out in the trialogues when it comes to the transition plans. The third problematic issue was the civil liability issue. You know, this has been something from the old CSDDD that you had a lot of criticism from businesses for. And the Commission reduced the harmonized or eliminated the harmonized civil liability. The Council has the same position, and now the Parliament also have the same position, with one change. We have strengthened the review clause a bit, but apart from that, it is more in line with both the Commission and the Council. The final issue on content is Article 8. And Article 8 covers how you do your due diligence in the CSDDD. And the Commission's proposal has been to work with a Tier 1 plus plausible information, meaning your direct suppliers, and if you have information, plausible information, then you go further. The Parliament has now, with broad majority, adopted a fully risk-based approach. And there we differ from the Council's position. So I guess we will have a lot of negotiations on that point. In closing, the next step now will be that we go directly into interinstitutional negotiation, because we had a majority for a committee mandate. This means that we have a trialogue date already next week. And hopefully we will now put full speed on the process so that we can achieve a final result for companies before the end of the year. And this, of course, is very important, because we need to give companies predictability in a very unpredictable world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. Now we will take questions from the room. Are there questions in the room? Yes, please.
Hi, Simone Martuscelli, Italian News Agency AGI. Two questions on political level. The majority on the Fourth Amendment, which was like one of the more sensitive amendments, was pretty tight. It was 13 against 12. So how confident are you that the majority is going to hold in the plenary vote? And on a technical level, or more like on transatlantic relations, the U.S. last week, the U.S. administration wrote a letter to the EU, the European Commission, asking to expressing concerns on the due diligence and the environmental legislation in general. Do you think this is somehow a reply to those concerns? This decision by the Parliament represents somehow a reply to those concerns? Thank you.
So on compromise amendment 4, we, as you said, it was 13-12. That was the most narrow issue, and that was the transition plans. No, I'm sure it will hold. We have now a deal between between S&D, Renew, and EPP, and I'm sure that will hold in plenary as well. On the issue on US, well, we are also concerned with these. That's why we have the omnibus, in order to make sure that we simplifies for businesses, and that's the entire idea with the exercise. We have not been influenced in the way how US is perceiving this. I am standing up for European competitiveness and European growth and jobs in Europe and long-term prosperity for European citizens, and that's why we make the changes. And if the US has support for that, so that's very good, of course, but we take our own decision in a democratic way here in Europe.
Thank you, Rapporteur. Next question.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Claire Stam from the French press agency AEF Info. It's about civil liability. Some critics say withdrawing or suppressing the civil liability has nothing to do with simplification, because you take out one legislation, one common legislation, and bring back 27 legislations, if I'm correct. So what do you say to these critics?
Yes, we have, of course, been investigating all the issues with civil liability in great detail. And as you know, that was the previous situation, that there were more a harmonized position on civil liability. But that also meant that you had a lot of complaints for companies and a lot of resistance for investing in Europe, both from European businesses and from businesses elsewhere. And we need those investments. That investment, that's the one that creates the jobs for European citizens, and that's what creates the growth. So the Commission has now proposed that we will go back to how it was since before. And that means you have civil liability, but the civil liability is on a member state level. The Council has also supported this, and now the Parliament supports it as well. I think that is a very strong signal that we have now we have a common idea of go forward with this, because it will help our growth and create jobs. So I'm quite happy that we reached this this results at the end of the day.
Thank you. Any more questions in the room? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Jarno Hartikainen, Helsingin Sanomat. 2 questions on the content, if I may. First, on climate transition plans, you said there are no implementing plans in the EP position. I don't quite understand what does it mean. Does it mean that climate transition plans have now eliminated from the requirements of the legislation? And secondly, you said that on the due diligence, on the criteria, you have moved to fully risk-based approach. If you could explain what that means. Let's say H&M, which works in the textile industry, which is very sensitive to all sorts of, very sensitive industry. Is it up to H&M to declare that their supply chain is risk-free, and then they don't have to do due diligence? Thank you.
Okay, so on transition plans, no. So what we have decided now is that you have to have a climate transition plans. There were, of course, amendments in the direction that you wouldn't need them at all. But with a big majority, they are now in the directive. However, there is not a need to have implementing action saying what you should do for the next period of time. So you have to show that you have them, but not what you actually needs to do. So they have to adopt them, but not show exactly what you need to do. They don't have to be legally binding implementing actions. So that's the change here. On the risk-based versus the Tier 1 approach. The Tier 1 approach is where you only have an obligation to check your direct suppliers. And that's one model. The other one is Tier 1 plus plausible information. You check your direct suppliers, but if you have plausible information that there are problems in your chains of activities, then you investigate further. The fully risk-based approach, that's the one we now have adopted, is rather that you work on the risk-based approach. You only work on the risks. That means that does not mean that you don't have an obligation to do it and just say we don't have the risks, because there might be plausible information that you have risk, and then you have to go and investigate that. And I think we have also worked a lot of these details to understand what the different approaches would mean, both in impact but also in simplification. And I think we actually struck the right balance here, because it stands together with international standards, which first of all is good, the OECD standards. And it makes sure that companies, they do not need to work on the tier one, the direct suppliers, because they are often in Europe, and the direct suppliers in Europe are often not where you have the problems. They are often in other countries, and that's why this risk-based approach has been something that actually all the political groups that now, well, I think, well, it was a very, very broad consensus for Article 8 in the Parliament. So everyone was actually for this. Now I haven't seen exactly how they voted, but from left to right, you could say that Article 8 is we had a big majority for.
Thank you, Rapporteur. We will now move to questions from the online platform, and the first one goes to David. David, if you are hearing us, please state the media you're representing and ask your question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's the same question as my colleague about the US, but this time about, say, Qatar and gas. I mean, that was one of the issues for the energy minister there. Do you think it answers their concerns, I mean, the concerns of oil and gas producing countries too? Thanks.
I'm not sure I followed your questions, or maybe I already answered it. So we take our decisions in Europe ourselves. Was that the same with as the US question, or did I understand you correctly?
So he was just asking about question not from from specific sector, so oil and gas.
Yes.
You can repeat your question?
I mean, it's Qatar. All the gas-producing nations have expressed worries that the legislation could hinder their exports to the EU, especially the penalties due to not implementing transition plans and so on.
Did you hear what you said?
So it's about the implementation of the transition plan for gas and oil companies.
So there is no difference in the implementation for gas and oil companies than for any other companies. There is no change for different sectors of the industry. So the scope is only when it comes to how many employees you have and what turnover you have. And if the oil and gas companies, as any other companies, have a scope below 5,000 employees and 1.5 billion in turnover, then they are out of the scope. And if they are above, then they are in the scope, and then they have to follow all the rules and regulations, including the climate transition plans.
Thank you. Yes, please, question in the room.
Hi, thank you, Marianne Gros for Politico. My question is about financial risks. Earlier this year, the chief of the European Central Bank expressed her concerns with the Commission's omnibus proposal and said that reducing the scope of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive would increase the difficulty of knowing the financial market's exposure to climate risks, because smaller financial institutions and smaller companies will no longer be obliged to report on this critical information. So I wonder what the rapporteur thinks of this expert opinion coming from the European Central Bank.
No, I think we have a very good balance with the scope that we have in CSRD now. So I share the position of the Council and of the Commission and with a broad majority of the European Parliament, 7 votes in favour out of the 25. There is always, you have to balance these when it comes to simplification and regarding how much information you achieve. When it comes to the financial market and the details and the information that the financial markets needs, then of course that is not the same thing as saying what you have to be obliged to do according to directives, because there is always a voluntary possibility for companies that would like to have the capital to provide information to their investors. So that still holds.
Thank you. We have another question online. Jonathan, do you hear us? Can you ask your question?
Yes, thank you. My question is on your negotiation strategy. You negotiated quite hard on this file, including by putting on the table the option to vote with far-right groups if there is no deal with the S&D and the Renew groups. This even led to the resignment of one of your shadow rapporteurs. So would you say in hindsight that this was an effective strategy? And also, you know, in Germany we have this firewall between the Christian Democrats and the far-right groups. So such a move, such a threat wouldn't even be possible here. Would you recommend your German colleagues in the EPP to give up this firewall rule to do these negotiation tactics as well? Thanks.
Well, thank you. I'm very focused on the results. We are in a problematic situation in Europe where a lot of companies choose not to invest here but elsewhere in other parts of the world, and that affects our economy, our jobs, our long-term prosperity. And that's why you have to find ways of creating a majority for simplification. I tried several different ways of creating that majorities. Put a number of compromises packages on the table. It was hard to get a majority on that, but on the final shadows meetings, I got a majority, and that is true. That majority was to the right. But I didn't close that meeting at that time. I rather put another option on the table, to give the groups in the middle, so to speak, another chance to react to this, so that they had two possible deals on the table, basically. They couldn't accept it at the time, but then I paused, closed the meeting without setting the agreement in stone, and said, let's check with our respective groups. And after all the groups had a little bit of thinking, we managed to have a very good and stable agreement with the S&D and with Renew. And I think that is very good, that they are now on track on the simplification agenda together with EPP, and I look very much forward to working together with them in the trialogue in order to achieve an end result that will create growth for European businesses and good-paying jobs.
Thank you. We have another question online. Eleonora, do you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you. So I actually have two questions. One is just a clarification. So do you confirm that the Tier 1 approach has been completely removed, and so the reporting obligation will not just apply to Tier 1 suppliers, but only follow a risk-based approach? That's question number one. And then question two on civil liability. You mentioned the fact that the simplification of Article 29 on civil liability was necessary to kind of meet the criticisms of businesses, of investors. But wouldn't it be worse for a business to face different legal risks across the EU because we don't have an EU-wide civil liability regime anymore?
So on your first question, it's a yes, and on your second question, it's a no. So Tier 1 is out, and the fully risk-based approach is in, and that has a broad majority. On the civil liability, yes, you're right of this, and of course we discussed it at length. Should we go for a harmonized process, or should we stay what the companies are used to? And at the end of the day, when we assessed the pros and the cons, we decided to go what the companies are used for. And of course, there are different views between the companies, but in general, the companies want this end result that we agreed on today in the vote. That gives more predictability to them at this moment, and that's why I think it's very good that we ended up in this situation as well. There have been some companies that have argued to have it harmonized, and but at the end of the day, when we see the pros and cons, we ended up with this situation, and I think this is the right way. I know that there are political groups that thinks a bit differently on this, but that is also why there is a change of language in the review clause to follow this question. But I'm pretty sure that we made the right decision.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions online before we close. So, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm Rebecca from Carbon Pulse. I was just wondering about the EPP overall kind of belief in transitioning and net zero, because if climate transition plans don't require implementing actions and only reasonable effort, then how are companies going to get to net zero? So it kind of begs the question of whether the EPP still supports a 2050 climate target. And also my next question is just to confirm the accelerated procedures, so that means the Parliament doesn't need to vote on this draft and it goes directly to trilogues. That's correct. Thank you.
So on the transition, on the climate, on the 2050 target, yes, of course, EPP stands behind them. And that is why the omnibus proposal is important. Because the way we have to deal with this is to make the companies our friends in this. We have to coordinate and collaborate with the companies and use the carrot more than the stick. If we use the stick, then they will leave to other places and invest in other parts of the world. And that is why we need simplification, to make sure that European companies stays here and continue to invest here, and then we can reach the 2050 targets. If we don't, we will not simply reach the targets. And it's not only EPP that are behind the transition plans that we decided today. I'd like to repeat that it was 17 votes in favor for the compromise package, and that was backed by S&D and Renew, and of course when we see the roll call votes we will analyse which other parties supported this. Then on interinstitutional negotiations, yes, so we had a vote on this today as well. We will go directly to trialogues. There was, if I recall it correctly, I think it was 15 votes for and 10 against, so a broad majority for that as well. And as you know, in plenary it will be announced, and hopefully we will continue with the trialogues on next week, directly after ending the Strasbourg session.
Thank you. And the last question goes to Matt.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. My question was around the decision to maintain the maximum penalty at 5% of global turnover. I'm wondering if you can comment on why you maintained that, particularly given that there have been some calls from major overseas oil and gas producers who have threatened to pull out of importing to the EU, citing in particular the maximum penalty of 5% of global turnover.
So, as always in a negotiation, there are pros and cons, and we have now a 5% maximum. That doesn't mean that it is a minimum, and I think the minimum was the criticism, and that's what we now have a solution that I think everyone can live with.
Thank you very much. Very much for your presence today. Thank you very much for the rapporteur for his answers to your questions, and I wish you all a wonderful evening.